Hey, and welcome to my very first episode of Books versus Shows on my podcast, Marissa. I'm your host, and I'm so excited that you're here. Sometimes you're probably going to see my dogs. They just like the attention. As I explained in my intro videos, I am going to kind of mix it up a little bit every week so that you have something fresh to listen to. And this week is Books versus Shows. The first series I'm going to focus on is Game of Thrones. Behind me, I have the 5-book series, which is actually titled A Song of Ice and Fire. So right here we have book 1, which is A Game of Thrones. Book 2 is A Clash of Kings. Book 3 is A Storm of Swords, and Book 4 is A Feast for Crows. The 5th book in the series is called A Dance with Dragons, which is actually where the show The House of the Dragon gets its storyline. We're going to start at the beginning with book 1, which is called A Game of Thrones. If you want to see a shorter version of this episode, I have it on my TikTok and I'll link it in the description. This idea of comparing books to their on-screen counterparts came to me about 2 years ago when I was sitting down every Sunday night to watch The House of the Dragon, and all of a sudden the season ended and I was in withdrawal every Sunday night. Here we are 2 years later and the next season is just coming out this month. I realized that a lot of other people are missing out on the details because they don't have time to read the books, or maybe they're just not interested in reading the books. But I wanted to read the books. So I started making TikToks noting the differences that I found while reading the books and watching the show. Of course, I couldn't just do the last book in the series, so I had to start from the beginning with A Game of Thrones. There will be spoilers, so just keep that in mind if you haven't seen the shows yet. Throughout the series, I'll be focused on the differences only, so if I don't say anything about a certain scene, it's probably because there wasn't that much of a difference from the book. So let's get started. When you first open the book, you get the maps of the north and south of Westeros. This updates in every book because things change throughout the story, so keep in mind that the maps kind of change in every book. Each chapter has a cute little heading on the top of the page like this, and the chapters are named after the person who is going through the experience. For example, this chapter is named Eddard, and this chapter is named Tyrion. The chapters don't have numbers, so if you're ever looking through to see where you read something, you're just going to have to count how many chapters of Bran there is in the book and then refer to it like that. But I won't do that to you because I know not everybody has the books. So directly after the maps, there's a prologue, which is kind of like a backstory of the White Walkers and why they're so scary. This prologue is pretty close to the first scene of season 1, episode 1. But in the book, there's a lot more dread because the ranger that finds the White Walkers massacre is actually an adult. It's not a young man named Will. His name is Garrett. And this guy is scared. It varies a little bit from the book to the show, but in this specific scene, the end is the same. Everybody dies. So the first chapter after the prologue is actually called Bran. In this chapter, we meet all of the Stark boys, and their ages are very different from the show. In the book, Bran is 7, Rickon is 3, Robb and Jon are 14, and Eddard is 35. In the show, Bran is 10, Rickon is 6, Robb and Jon are clearly young adults, but they are supposed to be 17 years old, and then the show doesn't give us an age for Eddard or Ned. The show portrays each character as at least 3 or 4 years older than the book declares, but I think this is because it's really hard to find a 3-year-old that can act for Rickon, and also little kids have a hard time memorizing lines and delivering them properly. For Robb and Jon, they were clearly young adults. I don't know why they didn't pick younger actors, but it's probably just because they had the right charisma for the role, so I'll let them pass on that one. For the sake of continuity, I'm just going to keep the scenes together that are filmed in Winterfell versus the rest of Westeros. So, for example, we're starting in Winterfell with the Stark family. We get the ages of the boys, but we don't get the ages of the girls until a few chapters later. But let's talk about Catelyn and Ned, and Catelyn telling Ned that the king is coming. Jon Arryn has died, and Catelyn knows that the king is coming to ask Ned to be his new hand of the king. The king and his family arrive in Winterfell. All of that is true to the book. Then we see Ned and the king in the crypt. In the crypt, there is a conversation between the king and Ned that we didn't get to see in the show. The king tells Ned that he was planning to have Jon Arryn's son, Robert, be raised as a ward by Tywin Lannister. However, Lysa refused this because she was suspicious that the Lannisters had something to do with her husband's death. Her husband being the former hand of the king, Jon Arryn. This detail about Jon Arryn's son being raised by the Lannisters isn't really that important right now, but it follows the storyline through book 2 and 3. And I'm assuming that later on we'll figure out why. Moving over to Jon Snow, he is eating at the feast with the Stark family. In the show, he's shown outside, excluded from the feast because he is a baseborn child and doesn't belong. However, in the book, he is eating the feast with his family and his direwolf is at his feet under the table. He's giving Ghost little scraps of food and then Uncle Benjen comes up to talk to Jon. Uncle Benjen is Ned's brother. He talks to Jon about fathering children and what it means to become a bastard, and Jon doesn't think he has any knowledge on the subject. So he storms out into the yard and finds Tyrion there, and this kind of sparks Tyrion and Jon's friendship. The conversation that they have in the show is true to the book. They bond over being misfits, even though they're both angry about it. So now Catelyn receives a letter from her sister Lysa saying that the Lannisters were involved in the death of Jon Arryn. In the book, Cat is telling Ned that he needs to go and be the Hand of the King so that he can be closer to the source and figure out what happened to her sister's husband. In the show, she's begging him not to go, but Ned feels that it's his duty to respond to the king with honor and say yes. So at this point, they start discussing which of the children gets to stay in Winterfell and which of the children get to go. Ultimately, the girls got to go to King's Landing because they needed to be courted and marry eventually. Because there's nothing really left for them in Winterfell, they can't become lords of Winterfell or rulers at all. So they just need to go off and be married. The boys stay in Winterfell, so Robb, Bran, and Rickon stay in Winterfell, as well as Jon. At this point, the king has Ned arrange a hunting party with his older two boys, Jon and Robb, and Bran wanted to go, but he wasn't allowed because he's so young. Again, in the book, he's 7. So as the hunting party leaves, Bran goes and decides to climb the highest tower he can find and watch them depart. This is not out of the ordinary for Bran. He is a climber, he's known for it. Cat always stresses out about him doing it and tells him not to do it anymore because he's gonna fall and get hurt. But he goes anyway, and he climbs this tower, and when he's at the top, he's watching the hunting party go on their way, and he starts hearing a conversation. Now, at this point, we need to pause because in the show, there's a conversation that Cersei and Jaime are having at the funeral of Jon Arryn. They talk about their secret and how they need to cover it up, but in the book, this conversation happens while they're up in that tower before Bran discovers them. While Bran is watching the hunting party depart, he hears this conversation happening between two people that are inside the tower. He hears them talk about Jon Arryn's death and about his father becoming the new Hand of the King. Curious about who's talking about his dad, he peeks into the window to see who's talking about him. He doesn't really understand what's happening because these two adults are without clothing, doing something that he's not familiar with, and he doesn't really know that it's not a good thing. But Cersei sees him and screams, and then Jaime grabs him and tosses him out the window to his intended death. Now that's the last scene of the episode, but I didn't talk about Daenerys yet. So moving over to Daenerys, she's actually only 13 years old, which is like mid-puberty. She's not a grown woman and she's not developed yet. So it's not like Drogo should want her for her body because she's only 13. But anyway, so Daenerys is 13, Viserys, her older brother, is 22, so he is much older than her, and he knows that he should behave better, but he's much more aggressive and abusive towards Daenerys in the book. In fact, he digs his fingernails into her skin when he's upset with her, and is constantly causing her to be stressed out, scared, and worried about everything. They also have purple eyes, which I think is like the coolest thing. I think it would have been cool to see them with purple eyes throughout the series, but I know that having contacts in is like probably super irritating and uncomfortable for the actors, so that's probably why they skipped over that. They did a good job though. The two actors that portray Daenerys and Viserys have pretty eyes, so it's fine, I guess. But moving on to her wedding, the ceremony was all pretty much the same. It was just a bunch of rituals and gifts. It was violent and vulgar. And then Khal Drogo gave her a white horse. She rode this horse as fast as she could, as far away as she could, before realizing that she needed to come back and fulfill her duty to her new husband. Khal Drogo is a much more gentle and kind person to her in the book, as opposed to the show where he's forceful and aggressive. When it's time for their little intimate moment on the beach, it was mutually consensual in the book, at least. I mean, she is a minor, so there's that, but it wasn't forceful like it implies in the show. It wasn't like something that she didn't want to do. She wanted to. Anyway, that's it for episode 1, but make sure that you follow here or wherever you listen to your podcasts because next week we are tackling music and figuring out how to become a Swiftie. Check out my TikTok for shorter condensed versions of these videos and for other fun content like when I go to Disneyland or the beach or whatever. Thanks for tuning in and I will see you next week.